Uh-oh. You can have any one of these three. Yeah, the public space. Let's come back from the break, please. Do you want to just trade it out for one of these three? No one's here.
Yeah, I think
yours works.
Yeah, this one works. That one does not.
Claudia, take one of these two.
One of your own.
To Michelle. Oh, Madai's giving her one. There's so many. I have my own TV. All right, let's come back from the break, please. We are back after a short break. I see Ms. Miano at the witness table. Ms. Miano, if you would raise your right hand. We swear or affirm that you will tell the truth.
I do.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Knight, and you're going to have to get your mouth really close to the microphone.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I would call my last witness, Michelle Miano, and who has been sworn, and I will ask her at this time to introduce herself, provide a summary of her written testimony.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Michelle Miano, and I am the Environmental Protection Division Director at the New Mexico Environment Department. I'm here in support of our response to oppose the movement's motion for stay. Our job at the Environment Department is not to follow the general consumer trends and what's happening in this quarter or next quarter. Our job is to work with the residents of New Mexico to make policy to protect human health and the environment, and be leaders for the residents of our state, and also as the second largest oil and gas producer in the nation, our country. This is not our first foray into mobile source emissions. At present, we are in the middle of two massive changes. Things change in our environment and our society all the time. There are two changes happening now that are massive. One is climate change and air pollution, and two is rapid technology changes. Is this better for people on the platform? Okay. So, of course, our first massive change is our climate. This is a hard job at the Environment Department, being the Environmental Protection Director and an employee with my colleagues, because this is pollution that you cannot see with your own eyes. So if you can't see, how do we know that climate's changing? And it's science. We know anthropogenic greenhouse gases are warming the atmosphere. We know that our air monitors are exceeding ground level ozone. And unfortunately, we know that internal combustion engines are a huge contributor to air emissions, being the second largest source in New Mexico. Our second massive change is technology. On the bright side, technology is changing too. We are developing cleaner fuels, we're developing cleaner electricity and vehicles that can run on those cleaner fuels. These are not easy changes. We know this. That's why we are taking a whole of government approach here at the state level, and the federal level is doing the same thing. These changes are hard, and this is why we are seeing unprecedented federal and state investment and government intervention in helping us all adjust with these changes. These support systems are all timed to exist now and be in place now to create the transitionary path that we need to transition from only a market of petroleum-based fuels to other fuels that we know are less polluting for the environment and public health. I'm very proud to say that the state of New Mexico has been a leader in this space. Not only has this board adopted Advanced Clean Cars 2, Advanced Clean Trucks, and the heavy duty vehicle emission reductions, our legislature has passed the Energy Transition Act requiring cleaner electricity sources and passed the transportation electrification plans that are requiring investor-owned utility investments in transportation electrification. And then in just this past legislative session, we have new credits, tax credits for new EVs, for used EVs, for new and used hybrids, and the infrastructure that those cars need in order to fuel. This is indeed huge. We also were able to pass a clean transportation fuel standard. I don't want to get too much into the weeds of this, but in Oregon, this clean transportation fuel standard program has generated $80 million of infrastructure for transportation decarbonization. This is the kind of investments that we're going to see here in New Mexico. We're working together to help all of us adjust to these changes to benefit all of us. And as my colleague so well put it, there's a lot to do, and we're all doing it at state government at the same time, working with tribal communities, community-based organizations. We're all sprinting to make this transition happen as seamlessly as possible. As my other colleague, Jerry Valdez from the Department of Transportation said, you know, there have been lessons learned along the way, but that's not going to deter us from helping to improve our air quality and helping to bring new technology to New Mexico and help address climate change, which is affecting all of us. I also want to note that the need for benefits now is huge. A question was asked earlier, what happens with all of this infrastructure that we're going to be putting in place for the next 2, 3, 4 years in order to meet the needs of these new kinds of vehicles? What we see in our biggest fears at the department is that everybody else in the country, all the big markets that are going to get these new vehicles and new technology, they're the ones that are going to be driving through New Mexico and using all of our infrastructure. It's not going to be for our residents. We want infrastructure to be used by our residents. We do not want to be left behind. We want to be first in this transition. Benefits are happening now, whether it's the EV tax credits, clean fuel tax credits that are going to be put in place now, or whether it's the grant proposals that my colleague Claudia Borchert referred to. We're applying by April 1st, and our adoption of advanced clean cars is included in the narrative of all of our grant proposals to the EPA that we're going to be submitting next week. These grant proposals are going to be bringing in infrastructures for schools, school buses, heavy duty trucks, medium duty trucks, and we're going to be part of a pan-state effort along I-40 to provide charging and zero emission or charging infrastructure and alternative fuels for zero emission vehicles. The reason why we believe these grants are so competitive that we're going to be submitting next week is because of this board's action in order to bring money of upwards of, we're allowed to apply for up to $500 million. We want that money to be here in New Mexico. I'd like to end by saying, let's keep New Mexico moving forward. Let's keep the momentum moving forward and work together during these changes. We're already being recognized as leaders. Our council noted that we received national press on our adoption of the advanced clean cars, advanced clean trucks, and heavy duty NOx rules. I have meetings with business owners all the time, and they say, we want to come to New Mexico because you're leading the country. We know you're an oil and gas state, and you're taking steps that nobody else is taking. I'm very proud of being in those meetings and saying, yes, this is what we're doing. It has a real effect now in every meeting I go to, and I think it will continue if this board rejects the motion to stay today. Thank you.
Thank you. The witness is available for questions.
All right, thank you. Mr. Maxwell, do you have questions of Ms. Miano? Thank you. Mr. Da Vinci?
Hello. Couple questions, Ms. Miano. In your role with the Environment Department, did you see the letter from President Nygren of the Navajo Nation?
Yes.
And the first line of that, he states, I am writing to you concerning the adoption of California Advanced Clean Car 2, ACCII 2 rule adopted by the New Mexico Environment Improvement Board. Is that the same letter?
I don't have it in front of me, but I assume if it's the same as the
Exhibit 14. Yes.
yes.
And he lists several concerns in bullets in that letter. Were you aware of those when you provided testimony to the Environment Improvement Board for the adoption of Clean Cars 2? Were you aware of the bullet concerns that the president identified? So they're on page 1, there's bullets 1, 2, and 3. Were you aware that the Navajo Nation had those concerns when you testified in front of the Environment Improvement Board?
Yes, and it wasn't just the Navajo Nation. A lot of people from rural communities have concerns, and honestly, a lot of people in urban communities have concerns about what EVs are, how to charge them, what it means for rural communities, and so it's definitely been something that we've been addressing here at the department.
And I think you gave sort of a mission statement regarding transportation future related to climate. You talked about the federal government was making adjustments, the state government is making adjustments. Do you recall that, your opening statement?
talking about my opening statement here?
Yes, just a minute ago.
Yes.
And when you were discussing those federal adjustments, were you referring to the EPA scaling back their proposed regulations for electric vehicles in the rule that they published, the promulgated rule they published on March 19th, 2022?
I appreciate your bringing that up. I disagree with the rolling back aspect. The EPA rules provide a larger glide path for the manufacturers, and the EPA has been working very closely with the manufacturers on that rule. Their end date of 2032 requirements remains largely the same. And so I disagree with the rollback. And interestingly, the timeline that the EPA has set for themselves on the federal perspective is very much in line with our timeline here in ACCII.
My question was a little more precise. You were talking about adjustments, and the EPA indicated they were making adjustments to make an easier glide path, recognizing that infrastructure needs, market conditions, customer concerns would not justify the more aggressive numbers in their rulemaking. That is the type of adjustment that I'm asking if you were supporting in your opening statement.
Again, I don't agree with your characterization of facts, and so I think we have a disagreement there. What I was referring to was the bipartisan infrastructure law, Department of Energy monies, the IRA monies, the massive amounts of federal investments that are being made available to states, local governments, and tribes in order to decarbonize all of our jurisdictions and economies as soon as possible.
But this is the most direct, on-point statement by the federal government with the sister agency to the New Mexico Environment Department, the EPA. This is the most direct, on-point statement with regard to how electric vehicles should be incorporated and transitioned. Wouldn't you agree with that?
That is the federal government's new rule that they have promulgated, which is strikingly like the ACCII rule. Our rule as a Section 177 state is a little bit more aggressive and even more necessary now because of the EPA rule. All of the other states are going to be receiving deliveries from all the auto manufacturers of zero emission vehicles. And so for in Section 177 state, ACCII is going to position us to be first and not last in receiving vehicles as part of that effort.
When you talk about last, but there are many states that are operating under the EPA regulation that just took effect. You're aware of that, aren't you?
Is a federal law.
And in fact, states have to opt out of that if they don't want to be subject to the federal law, which is what you proposed that this Environment Improvement Board do, is opt out of the federal law and use California's standard, correct?
Well, this rule didn't exist when we had the rulemaking. The EPA rule didn't exist. So for purposes of this board's action, I would say that the board took action not concerning this proposed rule at all. It took action to make a decision to follow Advanced Clean Cars 2 that California has set up, regardless of what happens at the federal level. And so I think that provides certainty to the auto manufacturers, a part of what's happening in federal national programs.
So I'm just focusing on your statement last. So are all of the states that are under the federal regulations last?
Well, according to the testimony of the auto manufacturers that I reviewed, New Mexico is a small market, and so we don't get priority when it comes to car deliveries. And so that's the basis for my statement that New Mexico is going to be left behind because the larger markets will will have more power and have those cars delivered to them first.
When you talk larger markets, are you talking Section 177 or are you talking larger or other markets under the federal regulations?
Trying to recall what the testimony was from back in the rulemaking. I believe, of course, California sets the standard because of how big California is, but I believe, the Northeast corridor and Florida are also large car markets that the auto manufacturers deliver many, many cars to.
And you indicated that New Mexico is positioned based on the recent adoption by this board of not only Clean Cars 2, but ACT and the NOx rule, positioned to apply for funding from other federal sources. Is that correct? And in those applications, do you make a distinction when you are noting for those funding entities that New Mexico has recently passed a regulation? Do you make a distinction that ACC2 is on appeal, the rest of it is final, essentially, and it is not appealable?
No.
Do you consider that there is, in fact, a distinction between ACC2 and, let's say, the heavy-duty trucks rule, because one actually has a right of appeal, which they are exercising, and the other one, there is no appeal?
Yes, I believe that each of the three rules is in procedural postures at this time.
And when you notify these funding entities, are you notifying them of the percentage of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions attributable to each of the three separate rules?
It depends what the grant application's for, right? So we have many grant applications. One of them is for example, school buses. And so for the school bus application, we're not talking about passenger vehicles and emissions reductions from passenger vehicles. We're applying for funding for different kinds of transportation projects, and we are evaluating the emissions reductions from those transportation projects. The way that these grant systems work is the EPA looks at how a state stacks all the different policies that are currently in place within that jurisdiction, as far as if that state is more competitive or less competitive for money. And so we include the actions of this board and other actions of other state agencies' boards as indicator of, yes, EPA, we want up to the $500 million that you're offering.
And this was a question. Let me see. You may not have touched on this, so I probably won't ask. Okay, thank you very much. All the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Domenici. Mr. Bach, do you have questions of Ms. Miano? All right, thank you. Let's start on the platform. Chair Paul, do you have questions of Ms. Miano? You're speaking, I can't hear you. I'll move on, but I can come back to you. Vice Chair Richards, do you have questions of Ms. Miano?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Member
Sorry, I don't have
Galuski.
any questions.
Okay, that was Chair Paul. Member Galuski,
No questions.
Member Armijo, Member Coleman, Member Bitzer, moving to the other board.
No questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Member Ely,
No questions.
Vice Chair Trujillo,
No questions.
Chair Sweeney,
No questions.
Member Garcia.
Oh, thank you.
All righty. Thank you very much, Ms. Miano. Mr. Knight, are you offering exhibits or?
I would like to offer all of the exhibits in our NOI for admission for this proceeding at this time. Objections?
Do I hear any objections? All right. Thank you. They're all admitted.
This concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bach, you have to take us home here. So no one on the platform can hear you unless you're speaking into a microphone. There are two mics there. No, not those.
Sorry about that.
Yes.
I like this one. We had served a demonstrative PowerPoint last night.
I is working on it.
We'll go ahead and call our first. Not sure where we're going to situate them.
Well, so you can sit up there and the two witnesses can sit there. Is it a panel of two?
Panel of three.
Well, there are three chairs there.
Yeah.
We're just going to have to share the two microphones. And Mr. Bach, that microphone you can leave with them because the microphone in that chair is good. Good thing we're nimble. Okay.
Indeed.
Just a question. Should we just ask to advance the slides? For the
I think
next
that's
one?
a good idea.
Okay.
And Madai there is the one.
Great. Thank you so much.
So thank you, everyone. Our first witness panel is Kathy Harris, Aaron Kressig, Deb Kapeloff.
All right. If you would raise your right hand, please. Do you and each of you swear or affirm that you will tell the truth? Thank you. That was all three.
And why don't we go through and have each of you spell your name for the record? Deb, you want to start?
My name is Deborah Kapeloff. The first name is Deboroah. Last name is Kapiloff.
My name is Aaron Kressig, spelled AARONKRESSIG.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Harris, KATHYHARRIS.
Thank you. So I understand that you all have prepared a PowerPoint that summarizes your rebuttal testimony. Would you like to proceed with that summary?
Yes. Proceed. Okay. So good afternoon, members of the board, and thank you for taking the time to hear our presentation late on this Friday afternoon. I greatly appreciate your willingness to spend another day with us, and your commitment to be here on a voluntary basis is a testament to your passion for the state of New Mexico. So thank you. Next slide, please. Monkey. Okay. Well, we've introduced ourselves. We're here on behalf of Western Resource Advocates, as is Deborah Kapeloff. Kathy Harris is here in her capacity with Natural Resource Defense Council. But I will note that we speak on behalf of not just our own organizations, but also a much larger group of nonprofit organizations focused on preserving New Mexico's environment. And collectively, our organizations speak on behalf of thousands of New Mexicans who are members and supporters who care deeply, as we do, about preserving a beautiful and livable New Mexico. And it's on their behalf that we speak today. So let's turn to the matter at hand. The purpose of this hearing is to consider a motion to stay of the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule, which would put the rule on hold between now and the date that the appeal is decided. This has been discussed many times today. We are not here to relitigate the decision to adopt the rule or its merits. It has already been adopted. Movements needed to demonstrate that irreparable harm has been placed on them, and they have been entirely unable to do so. Next slide, please. Okay. So the points we're going to make today is that, again, the dealers have made no showing of harm between now and appeal, and when an appeal is likely to be decided. They have not attempted to quantify any type of economic harm. They have entirely failed to address the chaos and confusion that will ensue if a motion to stay was granted. And while this is not meant to be a discussion of merit, the movements have clearly tried to make a day about that in some fashion. We feel obliged to briefly rebut some of those points. The main points we'll be making is that policies adopted in New Mexico since the hearing have made the rule even more feasible, and that the EV transition continues to forge ahead. And the rule is needed in order to ensure New Mexicans access the benefits of the transition as soon as possible. Next slide, please. So again, the most important point that we're trying to make is that irreparable harm has not been demonstrated. It has not been quantified by the movements whatsoever. The case rests on speculation and anecdotes. ACCII, as was discussed extensively in the hearing, regulates auto manufacturers and not the auto dealers. According to the testimony of the dealers themselves, model year 2027 vehicles will reach New Mexico lots likely not till 2026. Thus, there is absolutely no explanation as to why anyone in New Mexico will be harmed in 2024 or 2025 when the earliest this regulation.
I just want you guys to be able to defend these numbers because I think that's really important.
Yeah. Chair Paul, was that you?
Okay. I'm trying to see where I was. Earliest the regulation will go into become effective is 2026. On the contrary, as was discussed by MED, a motion to stay could cause economic harm and eliminate critical environmental and public health benefits by discouraging early compliance, delaying the delivery of EVs to New Mexico, and causing general confusion as to how the rule will move forward. One way to easily avoid this chaos and confusion is by rejecting the motion to stay, guarantee we stay on the track that this board voted to set us on in November. Next, although we have discussed all these things extensively, and the matter at hand is granting or denying this motion to stay, we will take the opportunity to rebut some of the substantive matters brought up by the movements of this motion. Next slide, please. So let me start with this one. EV adoption is not declining in New Mexico, or is it flat? That is proven not through speculation, anecdotes, or distorted graphs, but through verifiable data. Verifiable data and market analysis is what important policy decisions are made on. And the climate advocates are grateful that this board evaluated the data and determined to adopt the rule in November. Next slide, please. I'm going to move quickly through these. And just as a reminder, the EV market has expanded in a truly remarkable fashion over the last 5 years. Since the start of 2019, EV sales in the US are up 385%, while sales of traditional gasoline vehicles are down 14% over that time frame. And according to a study put together by the Environmental Defense Fund just this month, actual EV adoption has exceeded 85% of the expert forecasts made on the EV market between 2019 and 2022. Now, I'll just provide one example, which is that in 2019, Wood Mackenzie estimated that EVs, and that's plug-in hybrids and full battery electric vehicles, would account for 7% of all global passenger sales in 2025 and 14% by 2030. However, in 2023, EVs already accounted for 15.8% of all global passenger vehicle sales. We are already more than 7 years ahead of the projections made just 5 years ago. Experts have repeatedly proven to underestimate this market. Next slide, please. And despite what you've heard from the dealers about an EV slowdown, the global automotive experts whose job it is to forecast the car market, predict continued strong growth for the EV market segment in 2020. All the ones displayed here show very strong growth in 2024. In the interest of time, I'll read just one of them from Cox Automotive. While not providing exact estimates of growth, they say, and I quote, "In the electric vehicle market, 2024 will be the year of more models, more incentives, more discounting, more advertising, more sales muscle. Demand for electric vehicles is increasing, and dealers and manufacturers know that selling more EVs will require additional effort." End quote. They also project continued growth in sales. Next slide, please. And let's make no mistake, the global trends we are seeing are being mirrored here in New Mexico. The trend of EV adoption exceeding forecasts has occurred in New Mexico. Actual EV adoption in Public Service Company of New Mexico's service territory, which represents a large portion of New Mexico's population, has already greatly exceeded the modeling they did just back in 2020. In 2023, EV adoption was around 40% higher than P&M expected it would be by 2023. What's happening in New Mexico is mirroring trends that are occurring at the national and global level. Next slide, please. And just to reiterate, P&M, Public Service Company of New Mexico, is also forecasting strong growth in future years. With these projections, which again have proved very conservative, we are on track to reach levels of adoption that are well within reach envisioned by the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule, given the flexibilities included in the rule. So what do we take away here? Adoption in New Mexico is surging ahead, and that is indicative of national and global trends. EV growth over the last 5 years has been remarkable, exceeding traditional vehicle sales and projections from expert forecasters. EV market is set for continued growth. These cars are coming to the dealers' lots, and as we will discuss later, they cannot come soon enough. New Mexico customers are eager for these cars, but currently can't find them. Next slide, please. In the incredible growth over the last 5 years, documented and forecasted into the future, is in no small part due to the incredible amount of private investment allocated by industry into the future of transportation electrification. $1.1 trillion has been made forward towards transportation electrification globally from private industry. Put that number in perspective, that is more than the annual gross domestic product of all but the 17 wealthiest countries on earth a year. A lot of money. And here at home, $265 billion has been made. This massive investment also indicates an incredible commitment towards ramping up electrification, which is of course critical because we need to ramp up electrification in order to address the urgent threat of climate change. And the automakers here in the United States are coming around as well. You can see announcements made from Stellantis and the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. Next slide, please. This is the last one. The last that I have for you today is to rebut a claim we heard from the dealers at the November hearing. And again, it came up in the move-in's testimony. And that is the claim that from Ms. Garcia that Stellantis is only providing battery electric vehicles to dealers' lots in ACCII 2 states. This is discussed in our testimony at length, but let me summarize that testimony. The statement is false. Checked the inventory of several auto dealers in ACCII 2 states, including several in California, where the rule originated in 2022. Here's an example on this slide. Clearly, even in California, the state that we've heard many times has the most EV sales in the country, first to adopt ACCII 2. Stellantis dealers are still able to sell ICE vehicles. In fact, that is by far the majority of the inventory they have on their lot. Simply put, it is not true that adoption of this rule will mean that Stellantis forces dealers to have only EV inventory. They aren't doing that in other ACCII 2 states. The rule does not require them to do that. In an announcement made on Wednesday, they reiterated that they'll be making ICE vehicles available to all dealers in all 50 states. There's no evidence in the record to support Mrs. Garcia's statement and clear-cut evidence that it is not true. And I will now pass it to my colleague, Kathy Harris.
Thanks so much, Aaron. And thank you all again for being here. I know it's been a long day, so really appreciate you spending your time on a Friday. Am I getting feedback? Okay, thank you. One point that I wanted to just also reiterate on the Stellantis announcement from Tuesday was Stellantis indicated their commitment to adhering to Advanced Clean Cars 2. And as part of that announcement, they also indicated they're going to spend $6 million in states that have adopted ACCII 2 to help build out charging infrastructure. And additionally, they're going to be providing resources to their dealerships on public education and to help ensure that the dealers are communicating the benefits of electric vehicles correctly, and that will help to further move these vehicles off of their lots. So that is a relatively recent development, and I wanted to reiterate some of the excitement that was coming from that announcement. If you can move to the next slide, please. So in addition to everything that Aaron said, I also wanted to address the concerns from the movements about rural drivers. While we've already discussed these points extensively in our testimonies in November, as well as our written rebuttal testimonies submitted this week, I just wanted to reiterate a few points. One is that, as we've heard again today, there's no requirement for any driver to purchase a zero-emission vehicle. But should rural drivers feel pure battery electric vehicles is not for them, but they still want to transition to a cleaner car, plug-in hybrids are eligible under this rule as well. And I feel as though that has been lost in the discussion today. Second, charging infrastructure continues to increase. Where the charging infrastructure has been placed thus far reflects where the largest populations are and where the largest adoption of EVs has happened thus far. But that's rapidly changing, as we heard in testimony today. Also, since rural drivers tend to live in single-family homes, those with electricity at their homes may be able to install charging at their home, which would alleviate the concerns of lack of public charging in these areas currently and can provide even more customer savings for refueling costs compared to gasoline vehicles. And for the travel that needs to happen longer distances, as you can see on the map, our corridors throughout the state are being built out to help really increase the range of vehicles traveling those longer distances throughout the state. And finally, on rural drivers, they can actually stand to benefit the most from this transition to zero-emission vehicles. Given the lower maintenance needed on EVs, rural drivers won't have to worry about their vehicles breaking down as much. And if they do have an issue with, and they are needing to drive, they won't need to drive far distances anymore to repair those vehicles, as well as standing to save a lot from reduced maintenance costs. Next slide, please. So just really quickly, because I know this has been talked about a lot today, but since the hearing in November, we've continued to see EVs become cheaper and incentives becoming richer. Importantly, the incentive program we heard about that was recently passed at the New Mexico State Legislature, a large reason as to why that tax incentive was passed was because of Advanced Clean Cars 2. That was a key reason as to why there was a need for that, because we heard in the testimony in November that we needed an incentive program, and that was heard by legislators and ultimately was a reason as to why that incentive program passed. And I anticipate that we'll continue to see additional incentive programs and additional investments coming as a result of these regulations. There are also utility programs that are helping to provide additional benefits to low-income New Mexicans, which you can see here and are written significantly about in our testimony, but that includes $4,000 for new or used income qualified public service company of New Mexico customers, as well as $4,000 for new or used EV for income qualified El Paso electric customers as well. Next slide, please. But in addition to these incentives, we continue to see the upfront costs of EVs decreasing. And forecasts show that by the time these rules are in place in model year 2027, EVs will cost less than the gasoline vehicles upfront. That is even before incentives. The final point on this slide was already stated in evidentiary hearing, but bears repeating. By the time this rule goes into effect, EVs are forecasted to be cheaper to buy upfront before incentives. With incentives, they will be much, much cheaper upfront. And that's in addition to them already being cheaper today to fuel and operate. ACCII 2, adopted last November, will ensure these EVs are available for New Mexicans and they can capture the upfront and operational benefits of EVs while cleaning our air and reducing our impact on climate change. A motion to stay would put these near-term benefits in jeopardy. Next slide, please. You heard an awful lot about how unaffordable and how out of reach electric vehicles are, but such a statement has not been backed by facts. When we look at the actual best top selling EVs, what if we look at the actual top best selling vehicles in New Mexico? I think you'll find a different story, especially now. It's important to note that this table does not consider the utility investments for low income customers. If we factor those in, we get some truly remarkable outcomes. A Chevy Bolt could be $12,000. A Nissan Leaf, which is not indicated here, could be as low as $18,000, which seems pretty affordable to me. Next slide, please. We did this exercise in the hearing in November, but I think it's worth a quick revisit of the dealer's inventory for a recap. And without listing each of these dealers by name, just for the sake of time, let me offer you some trends. These dealers are offering very few and sometimes no vehicles under $30,000. That makes many of the models we discussed on the previous slide cheaper or more competitive with traditional vehicle options. And two, they are offering very few, if any, electric vehicles for sale. So that leads us to conclude that one, it would be helpful if we adopted ACCII so they can have more electric vehicles available for sale. And two, their claims of EVs sitting on their lots for a long time doesn't seem to have much credibility, as there are very few or no EVs on their lots at the present moment. Next slide, please. The dealers say they represent the auto market, but customers drive the auto market. And the testimonials of over 40 New Mexicans gathered in the last week are submitted as an attachment to the testimony. But I wanted to just highlight a couple of those here. The anecdotes were collected by an email survey, and the survey respondents declared under penalty of perjury that their responses were true and correct. Now, we certainly acknowledge that these are anecdotes, and decisions like this should not be entirely based on such. But please consider them alongside our volumes of statistics, data, and market trends about actual New Mexicans' experiences trying to purchase electric vehicles here in New Mexico. I don't want to speak for these respondents, so I will just leave these up for a moment for folks to be able to read, but these are also included as an exhibit in our testimony, along with several others. I hope that was enough time to read, but if not, I encourage you to take a look later. If you could go to the next slide, please. But even in this week alone, we've seen significant announcements that reiterate that the future of our transportation system is clean. On Wednesday, the EPA announced new clean car standards, which are going to help clean up the cars on our road. However, I know we've talked about this extensively today, but just to reiterate, EPA's standards are different than ACCII. EPA sets emissions technology neutral standards, and there's no technology requirements under the EPA. Automakers have many paths that they could take to achieve compliance with the rules. It's been discussed a lot today about what actually the targets are within the EPA new clean car standards. And I know Mr. Dominici has stated that there has been a halving of the regulations, which I don't see evidence for, or that's not the full picture, which I wanted to describe for a moment. What EPA actually states is that between 35 to 56 of vehicles in 2032 are projected to be battery electric vehicles alone. This does not include plug-in hybrid vehicles, which when we consider plug-in hybrid vehicles, which again are also vehicles that are eligible under ACCII, EPA projects that there will be an additional 13 to 36% of sales. Combining these two, EPA projects that between 69 and 71% of plug-in hybrid and battery electric vehicles by 2032. Again, to reiterate, this is all based off of potential compliance pathways that automakers could utilize in order to achieve compliance. And EPA assumes that this is a pathway that automakers will choose because automakers have already invested billions of dollars towards electric vehicles, and it will likely be the most cost-effective way for automakers to achieve compliance. So again, should they choose that pathway, it's also notable to highlight that in model year 2027, EPA is estimating that between 32% and 34% of new vehicle sales will be battery electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids. But I also wanted to note that John Bozzella, the president and the CEO of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, was present and spoke at the announcement, at the regulation announcement on Wednesday, and stated that automakers are all in on electrification. And I'll reiterate again that we've discussed in our testimony in November, no automakers have opposed this regulation in California or in any state regulatory process. Were they concerned about meeting these targets in New Mexico? They would be here. And I think it's just very clear that the future is is clean vehicles and zero emission vehicles. But regardless of what is happening at the federal level, ACCII continues to be vital here in New Mexico to ensure that EVs and the cleanest cars come to New Mexico, bringing the inventory that New Mexico drivers do want, providing stronger than federal technology standards that benefit customers, and providing resiliency against fluctuations at the federal level. The dealers stated that automakers don't care about New Mexico and they'll never be a priority for them. But ACCII guarantees that New Mexico will be a priority for the delivery of electric vehicles. Next slide, and this is my final slide. So in conclusion, the merits of ACCII have been argued extensively, and the joint boards have already adopted this policy. The hearing has already happened, and this is not a hearing on whether or not to adopt ACCII. It has been adopted. The question here, among other things, is whether the dealers will suffer irreparable harm before an appeal can be decided, and they have provided zero evidence of irreparable harm in that time. So sorry, there's one more slide. And so just to now I'll final end up. But what has changed since the hearing is that EV prices are continuing to fall. New purchase incentives from state and electric utilities in New Mexico have been in place in part as a result of adoption of ACCII. Federal incentives are available at point of sale for drivers to utilize today. The EPA tailpipe standards passed, and we heard further commitments from automakers on their commitment to a zero emission vehicle future. And the auto industry continues to promote and invest in electrification. So thank you again all for so much for your time, and I'm open to questions.
From Capella.
No, I'm just here to answer any questions about the New Mexico tax credit or utility incentives.
Thank you very much. Let's see, Mr. Maxwell, do you have questions of this panel? Thank you. Mr. Domenici?
Good panel. I just have a few questions. Harris, I think you indicated that John Bozzella, president of the Alliance of Automobile Innovation, was at the press conference where the EPA announced their regulation.
John Bozzella is the president and CEO of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. And yes, he spoke at the announcement of the regulations on Wednesday.
Was quoted in the Street Journal as indicating the rules are a quote stretch goal. Did you hear him state that at that press conference?
The statement that he provided says this should give the market and supply this should give the market and supply chains a chance to catch up. But he also indicated that the future is electrification and automakers are committed to this EV transition.
call the rules a stretch goal.
I do not have the transcript of his remarks in front of me.
You all listed a number of clients, also provided a number of testimonials. Navajo Nation is not your client, correct?
Well, we don't know that we have clients. So, but no, I guess we don't have clients or organizations, witnesses. Yeah. But I guess no is the answer. Then.
The clients that you're testifying on as witnesses do not include the Navajo Nation.
We're testifying on behalf of organizations in a coalition. I wouldn't call them clients, but the Navajo Nation is not in that coalition.
Any of the three of you spoken with any representatives of official representatives of the Navajo Nation regarding their position on ACCII for New Mexico?
Do not believe so.
Now, a couple of questions out of your written testimony. These will go to you, Ms. Harris, and hopefully quick, but if you have your testimony, it'll make it quicker.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify that our written testimony is on behalf of myself, Aaron, and Deborah as well.
So this question may not be to you then. There's a chart, number of vehicles. This would be on page 16 and 17. Your testimony, maybe whoever is responsible for that chart would be the best person for my question. Let me know.
Yeah, please proceed with your question.
So you list these 10 most popular vehicles, then you have the MSRP. What does that stand for?
Stands for Manufacturer's Suggested Retail Price.
Did you do any analysis to see what the actual transaction price was for the purchase of these vehicles?
No, the way that I acquired these MSRPs is that I went to the relevant OEM website, and where there was the option to input a location specific zip code before receiving the MSRP, I used an Albuquerque zip code to procure these MSRPs. And these are also MSRPs for base models of each of these vehicles.
What do you mean by base model?
By that, I mean the most affordable model. Many vehicles have various trim levels. So, for example, for the Ford F-150 Lightning, I believe that Ford F-150 Lightning that is priced with an MSRP of $49,995 is the Pro version. There's also an XLT, a Lariat, and I believe perhaps another version of that model.
Thank you very much. This would be for Mr. Harris or Ms. Harris or Mr. Kressig. I'm not sure who. Well, let me ask you separately, and then you can defer to the other one if that's the best way. So, Ms. Harris, did the EPA soften the targets from the proposed regulation to the one that they actually implemented 2 days ago?
No, I would disagree with that.
Did they change their numerical mandates?
No, actually, well, I will say there's a slight difference. So again, EPA only provides a grams per mile tailpipe emission standard that happens annually. So what was proposed by EPA was in model year 2032, an 82 grams per mile and stringency, which again can be met by a variety of flexibilities within the rule. The final regulation that was passed is 85 grams per mile in model year 2032. So it's a slight difference in the final regulation, but it is very close.
And did the EPA propose more flexibility to allow, they called a glide path for manufacturers to meet their requirements?
So I will say that the regulation that was dropped on Wednesday is over 1,000 pages. And given also needing to prepare for this testimony, I have not had a chance to dive deep into every single potential flexibility that's within the regulation. So it is hard for me to fully say that at this time.
And you haven't done, this would be for you or Mr. Kressig. Have either of you done any analysis as to the time that the appeal will take to be decided that is pending in this case?
I have not.
All the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Knight. All right, thank you. Let's start with the State Board. Member Garcia, do you have questions of this panel?
Questions, thank you.
Chair Sweeney.
No questions.
Vice Chair Trujillo.
I have a couple of questions. Kind of follow Mr. Domenici's line of questioning. You mentioned that you represent a coalition of organizations and that you represent citizens of New Mexico. So if you could actually just kind of flesh that out a little bit.
Yeah, that was me who said that. And I think so. The Climate Advocates Group is several. It's many organizations are represented, and we have members. Those are people who are either contribute through small donations or are signed up for our newsletters to be members of our organizations as either, in some cases volunteers, in some cases are just okay, yeah, this is the list here. That participate in some ways through membership in our organizations. And I'll say that some of our organizations are more membership based than others. For example, Sierra Club is a well-known membership based organization. But each of the organizations that are in our coalition have some form of membership in the state of New Mexico.
And so as you gathered the information for your presentation and your testimonies, did you interview people in New Mexico? Did you work with local legislators? I'm just curious because it sounds like you're not based in New Mexico, so you're coming in to gather this information. Is that what I'm understanding?
So to be clear, many of the organizations that we represent in this coalition are based in New Mexico. That includes Western Resource Advocates, which has had an office in Santa Fe for decades, as well as NRDC, which has a large presence in New Mexico. The way that those testimonials that are attached as an exhibit to the testimony were gathered were through this local Sierra Club chapter. They are also represented by climate advocates and are part of this coalition. And so that email went out to a listserv of their members who then filled out the survey and allowed for their responses to be compiled as that attachment to our testimony.
Thank you. I appreciate what you said.
Member Ely.
No questions.
Thank you. Member Bitzer.
I have no questions.
All right. Chair Paul.
No questions. Thank you.
Vice Chair Richards.
No questions.
Member Coleman. Member Armijo. Member Galuski.
No questions, thank you.
All right, thank you. In that case, I think the panel can be excused. Thank you all very much.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Mr. DeSalem. Mr. Bradley, would raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth? Thank you.
My name is David Bradley, and my business address is 2511 First Street Northwest, Albuquerque, New Mexico, 87102. I'm an automobile dealer. I'm the owner of an automobile dealership.
Bradley, have you reviewed any documents in preparation for this hearing?
Indeed, I have read the testimonies of Ms. Garcia, Mr. Ortiz. I've also looked at the exhibits that were I forget what you call it, but yes, I did read it.
Okay, so you've reviewed the submittals that the auto dealers and Automundo Garcia submitted for this hearing.
That's correct. The New Mexico Automobile Dealers Association and Automundo.
Okay, thank you. And you prepared written testimony in response to the exhibits and the testimony submittals that Automundo Garcia and the New Mexico Automotive Dealers Association presented.
Yes, I have prepared written testimony.
Okay, and I'd like to refer you to a document that has been marked as Climate Advocates D. Do you have that with you?
Yes.
You identify it.
Identify it? I wrote it.
Okay, so at your
Yes.
okay, prepared it yourself.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and you adopt it today as your.
I do.
Now, could you briefly describe your business?
I sure can. I'm an automobile dealer of pre-owned vehicles. I've been in business just a few years with the idea to get into electric vehicles. So I started out with one. I have a very small lot. It's just me, I'm the owner and the only employee. I like to provide affordable vehicles to people, have them independently inspected before I sell them. I like to basically give all the information about a vehicle to a customer and not just sell them a vehicle, but provide the information that they need to make the most educated decision they can.
Now, Bradley, based on your experience as is it your opinion that demand for electric vehicles in New Mexico is strong?
Yes, it's my opinion that it's strong. I think since the Inflation Reduction Act kicked in with the $4,000 tax credit for used vehicles has helped out my business a great deal. That was when that first came out. It was similar to the New Mexico tax credit, where you see it the following year. You didn't get it at time of sale, right? They just provide the documents, and when they file their taxes, they get the credit. But yes, to answer your question, significant increase since then, yes.
Do you see demand for electric vehicles increasing or decreasing?
Yeah, increasing. I can't keep them in stock. I've never had my lot turn like this. And going forward, I'm probably just going to sell EVs. I have that opportunity now, so I'm really excited about it. The goal has been reached. And I'm at this rate, I'm selling twice as much as I have year to year. I think over twice as much right now. So I'm doing really well. I see the demand. I get calls almost every day about people that are interested in EVs. Sometimes they just want to talk, and sometimes they show up. So I'm open by appointment, and I do like to talk to my customers, whether they buy or not. I always feel that people should get the right vehicle for them. So I think a lot of it has to do with I can transfer this year. Since January, I've been able to transfer the tax credit. So if a customer comes to me and they qualify, I'm set up with the IRS to accept the transfer of cash in like a matter of a couple days, maybe 5. And I think that's had a lot to do with it because I can advertise that this $20,000 vehicle is now $16,000 if you qualify for the tax credit.
Now, do you believe that educating customers about electric vehicles is important?
Yeah, absolutely. Without educating any of my customers, I wouldn't have any business at all. If you have to explain the incentives to the customers and how they work and how they can qualify and why this vehicle qualifies and maybe another vehicle doesn't. I explain to them the maintenance issue, the lack of maintenance, really, that you can just, with an EV, there's such little maintenance on them. I mean, I explain it this way: you may not ever have to replace your brakes if you drive it right, with regenerative braking, and I think people's mind get blown when I tell them you can drive 250 miles. It'll cost you under $1. If you're on the PNM, if you sign up with the PNM, they will put in a new meter, and between the hours of 11 p.m. and 5 a.m., you can charge for, I think, 1 cent per kilowatt hour. I mean, that's awesome. 250 miles for under $1. I don't drive 250 miles a day, but if I did, that's a big selling point, And then to not have to have oil changes and transmission fluid, it adds up really quickly. All those maintenance things add up. The lack of having to even stop for fuel. You park your car, charger's right there, plug it in, you go home and make dinner. I mean, it's a really easy life. So yeah, after a while, people do. I also educate people about New Mexico does have a unique transportation circumstance, right? A lot of people do travel from Los Lunas to Albuquerque or Santa Fe, or Albuquerque to Santa Fe, Berlin. A lot of commuters, and then we can talk about living way out in the country on the west or the northeast, where you travel maybe 20 or 30 miles to drop your children off at school. In a V8, that costs a lot of money. Right? That's a round trip, 50 miles. And then, another 40 miles to get to work. So at the end of the day, you're maybe looking at 150, 200 tops miles that you drove in one day. That's a lot. And when you're getting 15 miles per gallon, I can't tell you that this vehicle is going to pay for itself, really, in a matter of 10 years, I believe, between fuel and maintenance. And that's something that I think these vehicles were marketed towards the urban, right? Like you're not traveling far, because that was 10 years ago, even 8 years ago. So think about 8 years ago, we had a vehicle that only got a 60-mile range, a 75-mile range. It was definitely under 100, right? Nothing was, not much was, I think Tesla had, other than that, there wasn't a whole lot of range. So they were marketed towards urban, and it's kind of stayed that way. But if you really look at the numbers now, that the vehicles that are coming out right now this year is a minimum of 250-mile range. It's pretty good. And then, so for 8 years, we've practically tripled it, or quadrupled it. In 8 years, what's going to happen next? I mean, are we going to be at 1,000 miles per charge? I don't know. We don't know because the technology is not there, right? It could still be at 300, but I highly doubt it. So that is. Sorry if I went too long on that, but it just, life gets easier and it's cleaner and they're a lot more fun to drive. After I put somebody in a car, after talking to them and I put them in, it's done. Take it home. Thank you.
Okay, and now you mentioned accident. Found it.
Originally, I was a little intimidated having to sign up with the IRS and go through all the things. It took me 15 minutes. And then it took like about a couple of days. They got back to me and I was approved to accept transfer of tax credits. And that's when everything changed. Once I could do that, and then I was a little weary that the IRS would forget about little old me and I wouldn't get my $4,000 or 30% up to $4,000. And boom, it was there, I think in like 72 hours, maybe up to 4 or 5 business days. At time of sale with the customer, it takes about 3 minutes. It takes longer for them to sign the paperwork than it does to go through the portal and transfer the tax credit. It's pretty easy. I think I answered that right.
Mr. DeSalen, pull the microphone closer to you, please.
That better? Now, Mr. Bradley, have some of your customers been misinformed about electric vehicles?
Of course. I think a lot of people are under misinformation. I mean, right now it's everywhere, right? From social media to the press. You're going to get a human interest story. My favorite was about this clown he was in New York. Christmas, they were driving, and instead of, stopping to plug in, he took the chance and he wound up getting his whole family stuck. So he had to call a tow truck. It was very sad story. But what we don't hear, how many people ran out of gas that same day, right? I mean, people try to push it. But those don't make the news. You never hear about that kind of stuff. So it's along the same lines. When you drive an EV after a little while, you have a different mindset. You're going uphill into the wind, and it's cold out. Like, make sure you have, just plug it in. Make sure you have a good charge. And I think, if you learn to prepare a little bit better. I personally do not like to charge outside of my home for several reasons. One is it's super cheap. So I do tell that to customers. But getting back to this, again, I've had several customers this year alone come to me and they heard that there was no tax credit. Now, they knew there was a tax credit. So they said, no, really, to the salesperson, there is a tax credit. I swear. And then the salesperson, there isn't. I'll get my manager. I'll prove it to you. And luckily, they came to me. And it was great for me. And we laughed. We had a laugh about it. And I just think that sometimes people aren't taking this seriously. That this is real and dealers should be taking advantage of that. If there is one dealer that's not taking advantage of a $4,000 tax credit transfer, it's crazy because it's the easiest sell in the world. My negotiation is like, I don't even have to negotiate anymore. I just show them the sticker price and then minus 4,000. Okay. I had an 82-year-old woman that was being shown a car by a salesperson, and he didn't.
Hold on, Mr. Bradley.
Sure.
Okay.
Testing, we're going way beyond the written summary. We're just into sort of anecdotes. I would object to this continued testimony.
All right, thank you. Other than that, Mr. DeSalen, we have reached the 15-minute mark. Would you wrap up with Mr. Bradley?
Okay, we have
please?
just Mr. Bradley, are you generally familiar with the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulations that were adopted in New Mexico in November?
Yes, I am.
And is it your understanding that under these regulations, roughly 40% of the cars that manufacturers offer for sale in New Mexico statewide must be electric vehicles by model year 2027?
Yes, that is my understanding.
Okay, and is it, in your opinion, is it feasible to achieve that level of electric vehicle sales in New Mexico by model year 2027?
Yes, I believe it is. I think it would take a rise in technology, a lot of education, and a lot of attitude change. An attitude change would really be necessary.
Hold on, Mr. Bradley.
There's nothing about this in his testimony.
This is in his testimony, Mr. I believe the last paragraph of his testimony talks about regulations being feasible.
Right. Mr. Bradley, was that the end of your statement?
I'd just like to say, if we got on board with this, there's no reason we can't make it to 80% by model year 2032, by educating the staff, advertising, letting customers know they need this, that it's okay if you live in rural New Mexico, you can make this work and we can make it work for future generations. I think it's important to be the leader. Again, technology is increasing every day. Education and attitudes really need to change. That's a huge thing. Thank you for thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. DeSalem.
Thank you for the admission of climate advocate exhibits. I think I want to all of them. Didn't, just for the record, didn't number them, distinguish them from exhibits that we.
All right. Thank you for that. Do I hear any objections to the admission of the climate advocate exhibits? All right. What's your objection, Mr. Maxwell? Yes, please. All right. Thank you, Mr. DeSalem. Your response?
Well, let's see. A lot to respond to. I think I already addressed the numbering of the exhibit. As far as document being hearsay, the document is
Closer to the microphone.
sorry. The document is an exhibit to the testimony of the three witnesses that originally testified for climate advocates. It is part of the basis of their opinions. It may technically be hearsay, but the document that the auto dealers introduced earlier, the letter from President of the Navajo Nation, that is also hearsay. There is an exception to the rule of hearsay, which is sort of a catch-all exemption, which I think you have applied routinely in these types of hearings, and would ask that the document be submitted under that rule.
All right, thank you. Mr. Maxwell, Mr. DeSalen is correct that hearsay is often accepted into an administrative record. Certainly, either board may give hearsay in the record less weight if they choose to. But for now, your objection is overruled and exhibits A through E are admitted. All right, Mr. Maxwell, do you have questions of Mr. Bradley? Thank you very much. Mr. Domenici, questions of Mr. Bradley?
Madam Hearing Officer, Mr. Bradley. Have you ever owned a new car franchise dealership?
I have not. My grandfather had one.
You currently have about 9 cars for sale.
Roughly, right now, I do not.
That around the number you keep in inventory or try to sell?
10 is ideal. Right now, I have 1.
Do you ever had any of the manufacturers of the vehicles you sell require you to install vehicle chargers, obtain specialized equipment for yourself or your employees?
Manufacturers have not required me to do so. However, if you want to sell EVs, you should have an EV charger at your business. So,
how many cars did you sell in 2023?
well, I think approximately 28.
What the percentage of new car EV sales were 2022 or 2023?
I do not.
For a customer who wants to receive the $4,000 credit that you described, is there an income limitation that you tell them they must have?
Absolutely. There's an income.
Is there an age limit for that car? Age bracket for that?
Yes, there's an age bracket.
Is there a price bracket for that?
Yes, indeed there is.
And would you agree that generally speaking in the used car market, nice, affordable used car, gas or electric, in the $20,000 range or so is a target used car?
I usually would go for less, under 20,000. That's, yeah, I think that that's my target range.
And have you had any occasion to deal with any Ford Lightning trucks in your dealership?
I have not had any in stock. I've only driven in them.
And have you had any Toyota, Honda, or Subaru EVs that you built?
No.
Thank you. One further thing. Would you recommend that people, members of the Navajo Nation that live on the reservation, buy electric vehicles from you?
Absolutely. I think I could sit down and have nice conversation for a long time. And I can give you an example if you'd like.
Did you review the letter from the president of the Navajo? Part of the testimony you said you
I did not read the whole letter, no.
understand the concerns. You have an understanding of what the concerns of the president were.
Absolutely. And I think with proper education and dialogue, we can work that through. I think it wouldn't be a problem at all. And I'd be happy to have that conversation. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Knight, do you have questions of Mr. Bradley? All right, thank you. Let's start with the City County Board Chair. Paul, do you have questions of Mr. Bradley?
Hearing officer, Chair Paul had to leave.
All right. Vice Chair Richards, do you have questions of Mr. Bradley?
No questions.
All right. Member Coleman? Member Armijo? Member Galuski?
No questions.
Thank you. Member Bitzer?
No questions.
All righty. Member Ely?
No questions.
Vice Chair Trujillo? Chair Swina? Oh, you do.
I just want to circle back around to why we're here today. So if a stay was to be granted, do you see any effect on your sales or the sales of EVs in your market?
I do have currently 2 customers that are waiting to see what happens going forward. They would like that credit. So other than that, I don't think, I don't know how it would affect me personally, my business.
And you know, in the opposite, if the stay was not granted, what effect would it have on your market?
So if the stay is not granted, right, it's only more beneficial for New Mexicans to switch over to electric, right? They get another $1,500 tax credit that they can, use next year when they file, right? I mean, I think it would be good for business. I don't think that the stay would really affect me that much.
So it wouldn't have any effect on like your inventory or?
I'm having a hard time keeping vehicles in stock. I'm lucky. I'm happy. I never thought that I could sell EVs and be lucrative. And it's been a great year. It really has.
Okay. Thank you for speaking with us today and giving us a different perspective from a different place in the market.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Chair Swina? No questions. Member Garcia?
No questions. Thank you.
All righty. I think then we're done, Mr. Garcia, and thank you for your testimony.
Bradley. It's a long day.
Okay.
A long day. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And you can call me Garcia as long as you call me.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All righty. So we would turn right now to the closing arguments. We had agreed that closing arguments would not exceed 15 minutes per party. I do need to mention something though, which is we are fast approaching the witching hour here. They start sending people into the room to escort us out, starting around 5:30 and reaching a crescendo at 5:45. So I'm going to ask for closing arguments, but I'm wondering, is it worth having a conversation before I do about whether the state board must act for some reason tonight, because we're facing the same thing we faced in November, is decamping to another location. Is there a legal reason why either board must act today? It's a sincere question on my part.
The air board has a requirement that if grant a motion within 60 days, it's denied. I don't know if that same language is in your rules. There's a 60-day time limit for the Albuquerque Air Board.
And are we up against the 60-day?
I think they have two more. I think they have, I think, till April 7th is what they calculated.
Hearing Officer Orth, this is Vice Chair Richards. I just wanted to let you know that we are planning on following up on this with a special meeting to act. So we had no, as we mentioned earlier, we were not planning on taking action today.
Okay. And then what about the state board?
Madam and hearing officer, I was wondering if Miss Bowen, are you still on?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
This is Council Bowen. The rule for the EIB doesn't say that it either has to be granted or denied within 60 days. It just simply states that action must be taken. That's somewhat ambiguous, meaning that the fact that you guys scheduled it for a hearing could probably fulfill that 60-day action requirement. However, regardless, as long as you take action before April 7th, you'll have complied with the 60-day if there's a different interpretation there. So long story short, yes, the EIB can recess and reconvene at a later date as long as it's before April 7th.
Sweeney, are you happy with that?
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Bowen, for that input. Board members, do you have any questions?
So my proposal would be that we hear their closing arguments because we're all here together and we still have another 40 minutes or so, which should be enough for the closing arguments. And that then you can choose at that point whether to decamp to another location or to set up a special meeting between now and April 7th.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. We'd be open to hearing closing arguments.
I think that sounds all reasonable. My only question is if we choose to move to another location, if we have one available and if it needs to be on WebEx or whatever platform we're on.
Well, you have so many people. I'm looking at a couple dozen people right there who have relied on the representation that this would be a hybrid meeting, that I would certainly encourage you to continue it as a hybrid meeting. And the question of whether we even have another location to move to after 5 p.m. on a Friday, I could pitch to Madai here. I'm not sure the answer. Okay, so what she's
Locate.
okay. Okay, so I believe the answer is no. All right, so let's launch into closing arguments. Mr. Maxwell, do you have a closing statement to offer? Much, Mr. Maxwell. Mr. Domenici for the movements.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, chairs, and members of both boards. This is another chapter in this very interesting and very important rulemaking that you're involved in. I want to reiterate, the stay is limited in focus, and the request is only to the ACCII portion of this rule. Your rule is in effect and will stay in effect with respect to heavy trucks and NOx. So you've already made a tremendous progress on the objectives that have been stated. You've also, I think, seen some mixing of the benefits of those two with the benefits of ACCII and trying to identify some detriments to what you're doing. Based on in consultation with both of my clients, based on the testimony today, my clients are modifying their request for stay. We are not going to move to stay section 109. That is the flexible credit section of the regulations. We're not asking that that be stayed. That will continue to be part of our appeal because it's part of ACCII, but we do not ask that that be stayed. We withdraw that request. And we think that undermines most of the arguments that we heard today, because most of the arguments were that there would be uncertainty for dealers or manufacturers whether they could acquire credits. While this appeal is pending, that is gone. There's no one challenging that at this point. Now, in the sense that any appeal creates uncertainty, I want to, sort of reiterate that the idea that there's no uncertainty while your rule is on appeal is really leading you in the wrong direction. You have chosen, and you're not the only one. The California Air Board and many other air boards have chosen and have been put in the position by state statute and state regulation to be a heart and soul of one of the major transitions that was described pretty well by Ms. Miano. The transportation future, the climate piece of transportation, and how that's going to work out. That was not left to our legislature. That was sent to you to be done by regulating the car industry. So that's a fundamental issue that will be appealed. Is that really the way to do this? The second issue I already went through was, and you heard the confusion again today, is Clean Car 2, was it repealed by your last hearing? Probably, but before that, the way that I heard the testimony today, you didn't even need a hearing to repeal Clean Car 2. As soon as California adopted, Clean Car 1, as soon as California adopted Clean Car 2, notwithstanding that your counsel for NMED had advised all of you that if that occurred, Clean Car 1 would stay in effect. You just heard testimony today under oath that the fact that California has Clean Car 1 means Clean Car 2 is no equivalency, and there therefore is de facto no Clean Cars 1. You should have been told that when you were doing Clean Cars 1 because Clean Cars 2 was already in effect. All these people, dealers, all my clients, they should have been told when Clean Cars 2 takes effect in California, Clean Cars 1 is gone and you're under the federal regulations, which I think is, if you can sift through what happened today, Clean Cars 1 is repealed, but it didn't need to be repealed because California doesn't have it anyways, so it can't be in effect. Therefore, Clean Cars 2 is what applies, absent an effective Clean Cars 2 in New Mexico. But we are only asking that Section 8, which is the requirement that this model year 2027 43% of the vehicles, and yes, it might be reduced slightly by credits, but you hopefully have not been persuaded there's going to be miraculously 25% credits. They would have shown you some credits if they had them. So it's very likely Miss Garcia will get 35% electric vehicles. She won't be able to sell them. She'll sell her ICE vehicles to her longstanding customers to meet their needs, and she will be out of business while this matter is on appeal. The same's true of the other auto dealers, the Garcia dealers. They will receive 35% electric vehicles in a market that is flat, in a market that is selling 4% of those vehicles. There is no way 2 years from now they will be able to move those vehicles. Nothing here has persuaded you of that. Nothing has overcome the irreparable harm they would suffer. And then they suffer that harm, and then 6 months later, or 12 months, but it's not an indefinite amount of time. It's a limited window of time. The Court of Appeals will have a chance to rule on this groundbreaking piece of rulemaking for the state of New Mexico. Completely groundbreaking rulemaking. We are asking that while the court has a chance to look at that, the legal issues, the evidence, frankly, and that's the third argument on appeal. The evidence was a comparison of global, and you haven't heard it today, global trends, global statistics, global sales in Europe, somehow being translated to a flat 4% market in a rural environment where we lack the infrastructure. They don't translate. And we don't think the Court of Appeals will feel that there was sufficient evidence for this regulation. That's not the end of the world. That doesn't change the climate situation very much. We already heard a witness say the federal rules is pretty similar to what the state rule or the ACCII is. So the federal rules will be in place, but they are emissions rules. They are not going to dump cars on manufacturers who can't sell them. That's the bottom line. The regulators would like to say this is a burden on manufacturers. The burden, you've heard it, you know, is on the dealers. The vehicles come to those lots and sit on those lots, and those dealers have to absorb them, sell them, try to keep their cash flow, try to keep their customers, try to keep their service departments. They will not be able to do it. And there's no reason to force them to do it because the harm is negligible. The only harm we really heard is the credits. And we've heard that and we're indicating go forward with the credits. The only thing you would have is perhaps for a model year, there would not be this forced dumping of electric vehicles on my clients while this appeal is being decided. At most, you're talking maybe the total sales you heard last time of new cars is 100,000 a year. At most, if you're talking 30%, you're talking 30,000 new vehicles wouldn't be dumped on these lots in model year 2027. You heard no one say that that's a distinguishable 1 year of those vehicles is any distinguishable adverse effect to the environment. That's all that you've heard about. If you really boil it down, that's all we're asking. Don't require that financial havoc to occur while this appeal, this groundbreaking, truly groundbreaking appeal is being heard. Clean Cars 1 was appealed by about 14 states to last I heard it was in the United States Court of Claims, Federal Court of Claims in DC, one step from the U.S. Supreme Court. It took 2.5 years to get there. It's not even as groundbreaking as Clean Cars 2, as you all know. This rule is being challenged not just by these dealers, but by others, other states at the federal level. Is this really an appropriate use of the Clean Air Act? Is this an appropriate use of your jurisdiction under the New Mexico Air Quality Act? Was the evidence adequate to support this dramatic intrusion into the market? So let those issues be heard. The only thing we heard a concern was the credits. Let those go forward. But please stay Section 108, which is the mandatory requirement that while the appeal is pending, our car dealers could be forced to have to handle this large inventory that they would not be able to move, and would not allow them to turn over their inventory and bring in more ICE vehicles for their customers. You've heard one entire segment of our community is going to be affected and opposes this. The entire Navajo Nation is speaking through their president. This does not work for them. That alone should be enough to say, let's let the appeal be heard. But unfortunately, their voice really wasn't made present at the last hearing, but you've heard it now for purposes of a stay. So I think you should give that some weight and certainly say for the dealers that might be servicing their customers, let's not force them out of New Mexico for cars. Let's not raise the used vehicle price. Let's not manipulate the market. Let's not undermine the market. Let's let things flow along the way they are. Let the manufacturers acquire credits, which should bring vehicles here that people elect to buy. And then let's let our Court of Appeals study this extremely important decision that you all had to make. You know how close the vote was on this board. I understand the Air Board had the benefit of seeing your vote and didn't have to deliberate long, but you know how difficult this decision was. And you can imagine it's not a slam dunk. It's something a higher court should take a look at the record and decide that record. And so we request a narrow stay of Section 108, which is the mandatory delivery to dealers model year 2027. If there's any reason we don't have a decision by model year 2028, it would apply. The chance of that are very slim. There's probably only about a 50% chance we won't have the Court of Appeals decision before model year 2027. You may be bailed out. Even if you grant the stay, it may not have any effect. So with all that in mind, we think we've met the elements. We have a likelihood of success. We have irreparable harm. We haven't seen the public interest, particularly if we allow the credits to move forward. The amount of impact from that limited amount of vehicles not being forced to sit on lots as opposed to let ICE vehicles being sold for that small amount of time. We haven't heard anything showing that is some type of irreparable harm to the public interest or the interest of the parties. Thank you very much for your attention and for listening to the dealer's position and the Garcia family's position. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Domenici. Mr. Knight?
Thank you. So we're here today under 20.1.1.501. And 501C says that to determine whether a good cause is present to justify a stay, the EIB, with a 2/3 vote of the members voting, must consider 4 factors. Those factors are the likelihood that the movement will prevail on the merits, whether the moving party will suffer irreparable harm. So those first 2 factors deal with the movements. And the second 2 factors deal with everyone else. The second 2 factors are whether substantial harm will result to other interested persons. The last factor, whether harm will ensue to the public interest. So it's not really a matter of the movements having to meet these 4 factors, but the board must consider all 4 of these factors. Again, the first 2 factors relating to the movements, their likelihood of success and irreparable harm to them. The second 2 factors having to do with everyone else. All 4 of those factors must favor a stay. And if any one of those factors does not, in your opinion, then the motion fails. Regarding likelihood of success on the merits, the appeal of this matter to the New Mexico Court of Appeals is limited to a record review and will not consider any new evidence. In addition, the Court of Appeals will be applying a deferential standard, deferring to this board's interpretation of the Air Quality Control Act as long as it is reasonable. Given that there's a very solid legal technical foundation for the rule and that the hearing itself complied with all public notice and public engagement requirements, there's simply no basis, in our opinion, for the dealers to succeed on the merits of this appeal. If a stay is granted, substantial harm to other parties and to the public interest will result. And I think you heard extensive testimony today. It certainly is a lot more than the early action credits, the harm to public health, the air quality, and especially, well, not especially, but in addition to the manufacturers and the uncertainty, the possibility of resetting the 2-year notice period. There are a lot of ways that granting a stay could mess up this rule, far beyond the time required to decide the appeal. And in the meantime, again, the damage to the public interest will be significant. So all 4 of these factors need to support a stay, and in our opinion, none of them do. And in addition to that, I was waiting to hear some citation to authority about whether or not you can stage as part of a rule. I didn't hear any citation to authority for that proposition, and frankly, I've never heard of staying just part of a rule or one section of a rule. So I'm not even sure that as a legal matter that this board can even do that. Clearly, the dealers and NMATA are asking you to undo the rule by granting a stay, even though they say, it's just temporary. We've heard the testimony today about what the implications for that are and how the risk that all of the work of this rule could be undone, even if that's not what the board is intending by the granting of a stay. It creates tremendous legal risk far beyond just the time between now and when the appeal is decided. So in short, you've heard all the evidence today. I certainly have full confidence in your ability to digest all that and come to the right decision. So I'll keep it short and let the board get on with deliberation if there's time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Knight. Mr. Bach, would you like Mr. Kressig to say what the security guard said? All right, thank you. Mr. Bach.
Madam Hearing Officer, Chair Swina, Vice Chair Trujillo, members of the board, members of both boards, thank you again for all of your time today and for your careful consideration of the evidence. The dealers have a very difficult showing to make today. They have to show that each of the 4 equitable factors supports putting this rule on hold. If any of the factors is missing, their motion fails. Based on the argument and evidence we heard today, the dealers cannot establish any of the stay elements. The most obvious gap is irreparable harm. The rule doesn't impose any obligations on the dealers directly. And even the indirect impacts of the rule are years away. The dealers admit that they won't start seeing model year 2027 vehicles, the vehicles subject to this rule, until 2026 at the earliest. That's a long lead time. This long lead time prevents the dealers from establishing irreparable harm for two reasons. First, the Court of Appeals could clearly resolve this appeal for 2026, especially if the parties ask for expedited consideration. I've litigated numerous appeals that have been resolved within a year. It can be done. If the dealers win their appeal and the rule is set aside before 2026, there is no harm at all. Carlos Garcia admitted this in response to a question from member Ely. So given this fact that the appeal can be decided before there's any on the ground negative impact to the dealers, there's simply no irreparable harm. The long lead time is relevant for another reason. The dealers have plenty of time to adapt. We have 2 or 3 years to build out new charging stations and continue educating consumers. EV technology will continue to improve. EVs will continue to become more affordable. And we have at least one other legislative session to consider additional incentives. So there's plenty of time to adapt and make sure that the Advanced Clean Cars 2 program is a success in New Mexico. The dealers can't establish the other state factors either. There just is very, very little likelihood of a success on this appeal. The Court of Appeals applies a very deferential standard in reviewing EIB regulations. As long as there's some evidence that supports the finding and it wasn't completely rational, the Court of Appeals will uphold it. And here there was ample evidence in the record that Advanced Clean Cars 2 is achievable and likely to deliver substantial benefits for New Mexico. And this distraction about the legal intricacies of Section 177, it's just a pure distraction. You all know why you adopted the rule. You adopted Advanced Clean Cars 2 because you thought Advanced Clean Cars 2 was good policy. You thought Advanced Clean Cars 2 would produce benefits for the state of New Mexico. Nobody told you had to do it. No one told you had to, that you would lose out on any other benefits of regulating heavy duty trucks or anything like that. The record is clear that Advanced Clean Cars 2 was adopted based on its own merit. Finally, the evidence is clear that a state would cause substantial harm to the public and other interested parties. We heard from Ms. Harris that Stellantis announced earlier this week that they're going to invest $7 million to build additional charging infrastructure in ACCII 2 states. And it makes perfect sense for manufacturers to start making those investments. Car manufacturers are in the business of selling cars. If they know ACCII 2 is going to apply in New Mexico, they're going to invest money in New Mexico to make sure that they can sell the EVs and plug-in hybrids they need to sell. If a stay were to be granted here, it's going to muddy the waters, and more likely they're going to divert that money somewhere they know ACCII 2 will apply than to put it here when there's uncertainty. We also heard testimony about the early action credit, and we just heard now, and I have 2 or 3 paragraphs left, so I'll be done. We just heard now that Mr. Domenici and the dealers are no longer seeking a stay of the early action credit program, but for practical purposes, they might as well be. Manufacturers are not going to send additional EVs to New Mexico if they don't even, if the rule is on hold, and they're not even going to, they're not even certain what path we're on. They're going to instead invest, again, send the investments to states that are sending a stronger signal that they're on board. So if there's a stay, consumers who want to purchase EVs or plug-in hybrids in New Mexico will lose out. Manufacturers that want to get ahead of their compliance obligations will lose out. New Mexicans who are harmed by tailpipe pollution will lose out. Tailpipe pollution contributes to heart attacks, asthma attacks, and premature deaths, among many other health problems. Those are irreparable harms. If you have a heart attack, that is an irreparable harm. Having a few extra EVs on your lot is not irreparable harm. The longer we wait to transition to zero emission vehicles, the longer we're going to continue to see these public health harms. Why would we want to disrupt or delay action to increase EV sales and increase investment in New Mexico? There's just no reason to do so. Finally, we heard some questions about what would happen if the rule was stayed but ultimately found. I think this is a really complicated legal question, frankly, and I don't think any court has ever addressed it. But whatever, regardless of what happens, we're going to lose out as a state. You know, some people might argue that we have to delay the applicability of the rule until 2 years after the stay is lifted, or others might say, no, the rule goes into effect immediately, and then everyone's rushing to scramble at the last minute to get to meet those deadlines. So a stay is going to cause significant concrete harm. It's going to create confusion and reduce the benefits that have been amply demonstrated in the record. So all of these harms far outweigh the speculative concerns the dealers have raised. And just a couple points about the Navajo Nation, because that was brought up quite extensively by Mr. Domenici. I think it's really important to remember that ACCII does not apply on tribal lands. The tribes are sovereign nations and can have dealers sell the vehicles they want there. Moreover, the president of the nation did not say that he opposed ACCII. He didn't say he wanted the rule stayed. He just said he had concerns that he'd like to discuss with the governor. I think that climate advocates certainly believe that it is incumbent upon the administration to engage in appropriate government-to-government outreach with the nation so that they can reap the benefits of the electric vehicle transition. But it's no reason to stay the rule. It's no reason to create the confusion and lose the benefits that we have chosen as a state to move forward with. So the party should move forward with the appeal, and they should frankly ask the court to expedite the process so we can get a decision in this year or early next year. But there's just no reason to stay the rule. It would just send a wrong signal to all the stakeholders and delay the progress we need as a state to improve air quality and fight the climate crisis. So again, thank you very much for your time. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Bach. Thank you to all counsel for keeping your closing statements expedited. The security force here has graciously extended our time in this room another 30 minutes. So we will, unless I hear a reason not to adjourn the hearing and turn the discussion over to the chair of the state board for the question of whether you'd like to move into deliberations or set another meeting.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I just want to check, is legal counsel Bowen still on the line? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes. I just wanted to double check with you if you had any time constraints on your end.
I do, but I can make it work if you folks want to continue. If you choose to recess, you just need to pick a date and a time and a location for when you'll reconvene today. So those are your only considerations.
Hold on, Ms. Bowen. The court reporter couldn't hear you. Would you speak up?
I can try to be louder. Can you hear me now? Is that better? I just wanted to know that if the EIB chooses to recess and reconvene, you do need to pick a date, a time, and a location for when you'll reconvene, and you have to do that today so that we can post notice.
Thank you, Ms. Bowen. So I'm looking at the board. What's your feel? Do you want to continue? You want to deliberate right away? We only have really 20 minutes, maybe, in order for us to vacate.
Yeah, it's not a lot of time. I'd be okay deliberating today since we're all here. I would like to go into closed session for a little bit before we would do that.
Thank you, Member Ely. Is that okay with everybody else?
Yes.
Vice Chair?
Were we going to reconvene or I'm sorry, I don't know. We're going to deliberate and then go into closed session.
I think what the suggestion was, like, let's go into closed session and discuss the logistics and some of the things, because and then we can come back. Is that a possibility?
Your counsel, I think, should expressly bless the notion of going into closed session. Ms. Bowen? Ms. Bowen?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, I've spoken with the chair. The board can go into closed session to discuss the stay because this is a matter of pending litigation as well. I'm not sure, is the purpose of going into closed session here to discuss the logistics of reconvening the meeting, or is it to make a decision on the motion?
I believe if we can just discuss a couple of points, then I think we might be able to deliberate
Today. Okay. Great. Then yes, you're welcome to go into closed session. And Chair, just please utilize that language that I sent earlier.
Okay. So what legal counsel Bowen mentioned was a motion that we can enter where and I can voice that motion that I move that the board enter into closed session to discuss the motion for stay in EIB 23-56 pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, specifically NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1, H7. I hear a second.
Second.
Thank you, Member Garcia and Ms. Corral. Would you please do a roll call vote for us to enter into closed session?
Member Bitzer, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Member Ely?
Yes.
Member Garcia?
Yes.
Chair Selena?
Yes.
Vice Chair Trujillo?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Corral. The motion to enter into closed session passes. The board will now go off the record and will return in open session to take any action after the closed session. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Barry, are you still online?
I am. I'm trying to get on with my PC, so if you'll let me in, that way I can drop from the cell phone that I've been on.
Okay, or you might just have to call us, but call one of us because Madai is gonna mute the whatever the WebEx the system.
Oh.
Do you have my number? Maybe you can call me.
I don't think I do.
Okay. Vice Chair Trujillo has your number. She'll give you a call.
Okay. So I'll just sign out now.
Yeah. Oh yes, and Miss Bowen, are you still there as well?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Do you
Yes,
want
I
to
am.
maybe give me a call since Barry will be calling Vice Chair?
Are we logging off the WebEx? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, because we can't figure out. We don't have IT person here, so we thought we would just mute the portal or mute the WebEx and then do phone call.
Oh, that sounds good. Yep, I'll give you a call.
Okay.
Thanks.
For the record.
Okay. Can you hear us, Barry? All right. Wonderful. I know
Yes,
there's a-
indeed.
So I think we have to move to come back into open session. Is that correct, Ms. Bowen? Hold on. Huh. Okay. The board is back on the record and is in open session. The matters discussed in closed session were limited to those stated and listed on the agenda. No action was taken during the closed session. Thank you. And so we're still on this agenda item and we are looking at setting a date for deliberation. Members, we are looking at our calendars. What would that date?
I wonder if that's enough notice.
I can't do Monday either.
Yeah, and I think we need 72-hour notice for an agenda.
Well,
Today's Friday.
So it wouldn't technically be a special meeting. It would be a continuation of this meeting. And so the rule doesn't say that it requires 72 hours, but to your point, it's probably helpful for people, but not technically required.
Could we do April 5th?
In the morning.
In the morning.
And flying out.
Okay.
In the afternoon.
We could do the morning. April 5th. Okay, Barry, can you do April 5th? All right, see thumbs up. All right, so I would like to move that we set deliberations at a arranged location and hybrid, just like we have it today, and on 9 a.m. on April 5th. Member Ely, does that work for you? Yes, Ms. Bowen.
And Chair, we do need to specify the location, so I believe it would still be the same room.
Okay, can we just?
Or you can say the Capitol building.
Okay. I'm gonna amend my motion to say that the deliberation will occur at the Capitol building on April 5th at 9 a.m.
I second your motion.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Madam Chair, we're trying to make sure a court reporter can be there too. I don't know if you could check her schedule.
Okay. Oh, yes. What? Well, she's gonna have to. Okay.
I'll get a different court reporter to cover that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Domenici, and thank you, Madam Court Reporter. No worries. So we do have a motion on the floor and a second. Ms. Corral, would you mind doing a roll call vote on that motion?
Mr. Bitzer, how do you vote? Mr. Bitzer, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Member Ely?
Yes.
Member Garcia?
Yes.
Chair Suina?
Yes.
Vice Chair Trujillo?
Yes.
The motion.
Thank you, Ms. Corral. And then with that, we're on the next agenda item, which is, I believe, next meeting, which we just talked about.
Can I get that location just so I could pass it on?
It will be here at the Capitol building. The room.
Same room?
Will be to be determined. Yes, we will notice it within for the appropriate notice requirements. with that, we're on meeting agenda item number 8, which is adjournment. May I have a motion?
We adjourn.
Second that.
Thank you. Ms. Corral, would you mind doing a vote on that, on Member Garcia's motion to adjourn?
Member Bitzer, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Member Ely?
Yes.
Member Garcia?
Yes.
Chair Rena?
Yes.
Vice Chair Trujillo?
Yes.
Motion
Thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you all for sticking with us on the platform.